All right, thanks everyone for coming. You can't hear me on the microphone, but this is for our live stream audience that is watching on the YouTube channel right now. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Just make sure your phones are on vibrate or silent or off, however you want to do that. We are live streaming and recording this. And then if you didn't grab any lunch, please go back there and get you guys some lunch. There's plenty of food back there and drinks. If anyone needs to use any of the restrooms, they're right over here. If you go outside here to the right when you exit this room, they're right over there. Really excited today to have Karen Coody Cooper, who I've known for a number of years. She's a wonderful artist, author, Cherokee citizen. She worked at the Smithsonian for about 14 years. She's been in the museum field, I think, just about her entire life. So really excited to have Karen here today. She's also served as the interim executive director over at the Cherokee Heritage Center. She has a new book out called Oklahoma Cherokee Baskets. If you don't have a copy, right after the presentation, she will be available over in the gift shop right behind us. And those are available for sale in the gift shop, and then she can also autograph that for you. So but her book, Oklahoma Cherokee Baskets, talks about after the forced removal of the Cherokees here into Indian Territory, or present-day Oklahoma, and how those Cherokee basket weavers utilized materials and how it began to thrive here in Oklahoma using the resources that were here. So everybody give a warm welcome to Karen. I'm excited to have her here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. I'm so pleased to be here. Obviously, this is a book dear and important to me, and I couldn't have written it without the help of hundreds of people, literally. Every basket maker that I talked to was generous in giving me information. Museums that I visited, researching, they were very helpful. The Gilcrease happened to have had their collections closed at the time, so I didn't get to access those. But at the same time, they would share information with me as much as possible. So I worked on it for 2.5 years. The reason I wrote it is, if I'm going to write something, I want to write something that I think there's a need for. And with the case of Cherokee baskets here in Oklahoma, we've pretty much been ignored through all the long period of time. When books were being written about American Indian baskets, we weren't mentioned. Sometimes North Carolina wasn't even mentioned. I think the concept of us being the civilized tribes, a member of the tribes that were so seemingly altered, that it caused a lot of anthropologists as well as historians to kind of ignore us. And these two books came out before we were a state. So early on, the science of anthropology, which wasn't much of a science in the beginning, but became scientific as it went on, that whole science of studying American Indians kind of began in the late 1880s and then was becoming more popular and more important as time went on. So these two books came out. They're very thorough, hundreds of photographs in them, and nothing about us here in Oklahoma. And we were certainly, our people here were making baskets. So I saw a need for it, and even as time went on in the 1980s, an important book, while I was working in the museum field, we knew this important work on baskets was being done by a couple who were renowned for their knowledge of baskets. And when the book came out, we weren't in there. So even in recent time, we've been ignored. So I thought, well, what is the story? I can't go buy a book and read it, so I'm going to have to go research it and find how did baskets survive here? Because I was visiting antique stores and buying baskets. My husband and I have been collectors of baskets for some time, and gave a dozen of our baskets to the National Museum of the American Indian when we moved from that area and I could come back home to Oklahoma. This is a basket that I bought off of eBay in not that long ago, 2012, and it was $15.56. And it's hard to read the label, but it is a Sequoyah Indian Weavers Association, Tahlequah, Oklahoma label attached right here. That's the reason I bought this basket was, oh my gosh, there's a label on it with the maker's name. Took me a while. When I first got it, it said J, made by the initial J, and then the last name was really hard to make out. And I would start researching different versions of what I thought it was. Finally figured it out that it was Jenny Owens, and she was born in 1895, the year my grandmother was born. She died in 1972, about the same time my grandmother died. My grandmother did not make baskets, regrettably, but I certainly appreciate the people who were making baskets. And it went for $1.15 when she made it and was selling it in probably the 70s, I'm guessing. And then when I first saw this basket in an antique store, I didn't even recognize it as a Cherokee basket. It wasn't a style I had been seeing, but there was a tag on it that said Cherokee basket, and I thought, well, you know, sometimes they make mistakes. But as we go through the slides, you're going to see a couple of examples like this basket. It may be made by Maggie Alberti or people in her area of Kenwood, actually, although she moved to Tulsa, but that was where she came from. So first I had to make sure I knew kind of what happened before we moved here to Oklahoma. And I don't spend a lot of time in the book, but there is a section of the book on that. And I might say with the book, as we go on, that in the back of the book, I have basket makers who were born 1930 and earlier. It would have taken too much space to, to list everybody. I also, besides all of those nearly 100 basket makers of earlier times, I list museums that have collections too, and name the makers of the baskets that are in those museums. Of course, a lot of museums have baskets with no names, and some have some names attached to their collections. And so more than just the story, there's those kind of references too, more information about the people. So, Lita Jones of the Oklahoma Native American Basket Association traveled to London. She's not the first Cherokee who went over to look at these baskets, but she was kind enough to share the photo with me of this sort of renowned basket that is there in London in the British Museum. And it was made circa 1725. There's a lot of really good documentation on it. The authority who received the basket and took it over to London, and it was an English person who received it here in the colonies and then took it over and gave it to the museum. And so he wrote down everything he knew about it. He didn't know the maker, but he knew the time period and the information about it. So we know that these beautiful cane baskets were made by Cherokee women, most likely women. As time goes on, men also were making baskets. Then we've always been told that rootrunner baskets were a new way to make baskets when we arrived here, since the cane was not as plentiful, not as strong, not the same as we had experienced before. But here's a basket that was made in Georgia in 1810, and we don't know who made it. You'll see I've put Margaret Van as the title, and some people have suspected she made it. However, she had converted to Christianity at Spring Place. She visited there a lot, and she liked to give gifts to the missionaries and the missionaries back in the home office in the East. And so she wrote in one of her notes that she had traded some beads that somebody had given to her in order to get some of the baskets that she was sending to the home office of the Moravians. And So she doesn't say who made them, and we don't know which of the baskets she sent. She's saying she traded for, but it's made of a rootrunner. However, as much as I begged the museum, and it's at the Yale Peabody Museum, and it's been written about before, they would not take a sample and send it off, a piece of it, and send it off to determine exactly what that plant was, even though I really wanted that to happen. But museums are torn by these situations of they're supposed to protect the object, keep it pristine, protect it. At the same time, they're supposed to research it and find out information about it. And so it just depends on who you're talking to and the timing of when you're talking to them as to whether something like that might happen or not. So there's 2 of them, and they're well preserved, probably always kept in the dark and in a nice closet under the best situations that could occur over periods of time. But it is a rootrunner, and I had been reading accounts that said that that the plants that we use here were not existing there. And so I discovered that no, buckbrush does grow in the southeast, but I'm not exactly sure where, but it's listed by the authorities back there, the plant authorities, that it does grow there. And like here, it will grow in certain places. It probably never grew on my grandmother's farm down by Texana, but it grows up around this area and further north you get. So it could be buckbrush, it may be honeysuckle. Others have said that honeysuckle was not indigenous, and yet there is an indigenous variety of honeysuckle. The reason more people use the Japanese variety that's taken over is that it has longer runners, and so it's easier to gather up. So there's all these things that I had to learn. I didn't know this information before, and obviously as you see me talking about it, you know that I still don't know as much as I would like to know. I would like to say with certainty a lot more than I can, but I'm happy to tell you the journey I've taken in doing this research, and I look forward to the next book that somebody writes on Oklahoma Cherokee baskets, because it will be, no doubt, a more thorough kind of work than mine. So we have that information that probably when we came here, we already had experienced buckbrush or indigenous honeysuckle, because the Japanese variety came in later. So we were familiar with rootrunner basketry. And of course, when I say when we came here, when we came to the west, first it was Missouri, Arkansas, and then into Indian Territory. Of course, it all began as Indian Territory, and it kept shrinking until what is now Oklahoma on the eastern side is Indian Territory. So that's our holdings there, and even the Cherokee Outlet is shown there, and we had folks living in Kansas as well. And then it reduced to what we now know as the 14 counties. So the old settlers came even before 1800, in the 1790s, came west. And so they were, for a great part, traditional sorts of people who would have been looking for materials and needing to keep making baskets, because work baskets get used up. And people were using work baskets for gathering, for storage that would, wear the basket out after a while. And so we know that they really had time to explore the plants and learn what they could about the available dyes and all of that. Hickory, oak, ash, cane, buckbrush, honeysuckle, those are the plants that were popular. As you see with this basket, there is a wooden handle here. I'm not sure which wood. There are people who can look at that and tell me, and I haven't asked anyone. So if any of you think you can tell me which tree it is, that would be fun for me to know. As I mentioned, cane is not as, it's not like it was in the Southeast. It's not as tall, as sturdy, as plentiful. This is a different environment. And yet, we went on making cane baskets. That's another thing I discovered, is some people said, well, there was a time when we didn't make cane baskets, but as I go through the rest of the pictures, I think you'll see that it looks like we pretty much continued, that there was somebody always working with the cane. And some of you have probably seen this basket. It's been at the Cherokee Heritage Center a few times. It's not the one that's on the permanent exhibit. It's one that they sometimes have shown. It belongs to private people, but they share it with the Heritage Center for exhibits. And so when it came across on the Trail of Tears. Their family history says so. And it's a stick basket. It means it's made of wood. You know, sticks sound funny, but it's a wooden basket. And if you saw the bottom, you'd see it was a sifter. And then there's this beautiful cane basket that's in the Sam Noble Museum in Norman. And it also is reputed to come over on the Trail of Tears. And the authority that says that is a member of Oklahoma's early collectors and historians, and so I trust that she was correct. Alice Marriott collected it and said that she was confident the information given to her by the family she collected from, that it came on the Trail of Tears. It's very hard to document these things, so when you're looking back and trying to create a history that just goes from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, it's a lot of maybe, maybe, because I did run into other baskets that were claimed to be Trail of Tears, and yet when I began researching, I would find that a lot of the information given with it was not correct, so that makes me think that whole premise was not correct. So I tried to be careful about what I would be claiming something to be, but there's always caveats. But it's certainly a beautiful basket, and certainly got well used. And here's a cane basket that was attributed to have been made about 1845, so after we were here, and collected in Vinita by Marriott too, and it's with the Oklahoma Historical Society. And this was collected by a family of, they were missionary family, but they were pretty reliable in their information too. So they wouldn't have made it, so we don't, again, know the maker of the basket. This is the sad thing, is that I would love to know who made every single basket I saw, because that's so important to have known, but that information just didn't always survive. So as I mentioned, ethnology, anthropology came along, and James Mooney, yes, he did some great jobs with preserving legends and some of the history that he recorded, but he did not focus enough for my satisfaction on crafts and arts and what women did too. He didn't have a great interest, or was very shy perhaps. So he didn't write much about the women. Consequently, he wouldn't be writing much about the crafts that occurred. So, but he did, as I mentioned here, he did collect some North Carolina baskets. One of the people he talked to that related legends to him was actually a basket maker, a woman, Wayatsi, who made baskets, and so she related that information. He did collect her baskets, gave them to the Smithsonian, but he didn't say much about them, and he didn't get much information from her, but they do exist, and that is a great thing. So we were ignored, and then Frank Speck has written some nice material on Cherokee baskets, but again, his focus was mostly North Carolina, and sort of dismissed us, and some of these folks would even just say, well, in North Carolina they make really nice baskets, and in Oklahoma they're not so good, and I think sometimes they just didn't even come out here and look, and then would just, somebody would tell them that. But part of this is the Cherokee Nation fault, you could say, at that time period, because we didn't want outsiders coming in. So we were not really welcoming being scrutinized or looked at. We had our own place outside of the U.S. early on, and and we kept the railroads out as long as we could. So for somebody to come in the 1890s and study us, they could get to our kind of perimeters, but it was harder to get into the interior. And then I think we were also just kind of secretive about things too. If somebody comes in and says, I want to talk to your basket makers, and we go, well, maybe they don't want to talk to you. You know? So I see the challenges, but I wish there was more surviving history. But kind of the beneficial thing of subsistence living that we suffered through at that time by keeping to ourselves, and we had wealth in our nation. We did have that, but a large majority of our people were subsistence living. They were living on the land. They weren't working at jobs. They would do things to bring in some money, because you always need some cash. But for the most part, they took care of themselves. They raised their own food. They wove their on their looms the cloth that they made their clothes from, and they just could do everything. So that meant that baskets continued. People didn't want to go buy something to replace a basket, didn't want to buy something metal or a basket from somebody else. They would make it themselves. So that really helped, and it also meant that extended families, when you're doing subsistence living, is a norm to have the grandparents and the young people kind of in a community staying together. So kids pick up things when the grandparents are around that they don't necessarily get exposed to when we're living in single family life. So it was sad to be poor, but it was so helpful to our cultural continuing. And very early on, we started agricultural fairs in the 1870s even. I couldn't find out much about what they were like, but I don't know in the first fair what it was like, but then in succeeding fairs you would begin to see some information about crafts, about some baskets, but there's not a lot of information, and I didn't really find any, say, programs or much clippings, although I think if I had dug deeper I might have found some of the Cherokee newspapers covering the fairs to a greater extent than I've found. But I didn't get all the information, so I do hope somebody does follow up and do another book. Okay, one thing that has helped the survival of baskets is people who buy the baskets. If you were a basket maker, and early on there's reports of selling a lot of baskets to Arkansas, those of us who could get there readily. And so we were looking for people to buy them. And collectors, Clark Fields, the fellow that collected a lot of Cherokee baskets and gave them to the Peabody, or to the Philbrook Museum in Tulsa. And the Philbrook's the first museum I visited. I just thought I'd need to visit one that has a lot of Cherokee baskets and kind of get grounded in it. And so they were very generous in letting me look at all their baskets. They also were the only museum that I managed to find a lot of newspaper clippings from. This slide will show later, but if any of you want to look at this later, you can. It mentions a lot of names, and this was in 1940, and so there's some fairly older women mentioned in here who would have been born and remembered early times. This particular clipping you see is 1935, and so it was very helpful to find this kind of information to help. I mean, look at that photo, just full of baskets, and it's talking about a Chelsea woman who collected baskets. Well, she was Cherokee, Mary Hogue, and she was one of the fortunate a member of a fortunate family who had their property where oil is. And so very early on, once the oil industry family became rather wealthy, they bought a Sears home And so it's a home, you ordered the kit and it was shipped. Story. She would, in the horse and buggy days, wagon days, go out and start collecting baskets. And so here she was, a wealthy woman, but her heart was in the right place. She wanted to help the people who were making the baskets to get the money. And so the story is told that she never benefited financially from any of it. She didn't need to, and she didn't want to. And instead, she would buy the baskets, take them, and sell them, and then use that money to go back and buy more and take them and sell them. And she was always looking for markets. And so some were sold in Dallas, some were sold in Colorado, as she would have friends around the country. And I was so sad I could not find a photo of her. I spent a lot of time trying to find a photograph, and I know they exist. I just could not lay my hands on it. I would come so close sometimes, and with somebody saying, yeah, I had some of those photos of her, and I passed those photos on to my kids, so let me see if I can find them. And then I would call back and they hadn't found them and hadn't found them. And so, but I know there'd be other people that would have photos too. And I found some of her relatives, and they were big on family history, but as I would talk with them, they didn't have the photos. If any of you have looked at and discovered who the people are, and you know they were, and it's just not out there. But I know there are photos out there. They just have to turn up still. Clark Field, though, there's a lot known about him. The thing with Clark is he was a great collector, but then his interest, and he was living in Tulsa, and gave his baskets to the Philbrook, but his interest went beyond, and the photo on the cover of his book was made by Dot Solali, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but she was in the Nevada area and made huge, intricate baskets, and she was able to sell them at a resort area for the thousands of dollars. I bought this basket, and so his interest then kind of left Cherokee baskets behind. He collected them, and then he didn't do much with them after that. And then when he died, the Philbrook had changed its direction. They didn't care so much. I mean, when I grew up in the 50s, they cared a lot about local stuff, but then they kind of went through a phase where they wanted to recapture that sort of European aspect they had, because they have a lot of fine European and Asian art, and so they kind of shifted their focus. And so the daughter of Clark Field was upset that they were just putting the baskets of Clark Field in the basement pretty much. So she argued with them, and they managed to kind of give them up to her, and she and her husband started a museum in New Mexico, and the baskets were there. But they were never signed over to her. It was just kind of, okay, you want to start a museum, you can take these baskets, start the museum, but there was never a change of ownership exactly. So as the Philbrook got again grounded in local stuff, it had the baskets come back. So see, I get sidetracked, you know, not only in talking to you, but in the research I would get sidetracked and sometimes just wind myself. One thing would lead to another, and then I would go and I would be studying something quite diligently, and then I'd say, you know, I need to get back over here. So it's research is a lot of fun. And the spoliation claims were one of the very important records. As we were forced to move, the agreement was we were compensated for what we left behind. I'm sure not everybody filled out one of those forms, but those who did would be quite detailed. And so we can look on those and see the baskets listed in the household that was left, that they were forced out of the home and those baskets were lost. So those were very interesting to look through. They're kind of hard to read. They're in handwriting. And if you're looking at typed versions, you always have to be aware that somebody may have shifted a word and turned it into something else. But it gives you a very good idea. There were lots of baskets we left, and obviously when we got here, we needed to replace those. So there were lots of need to keep making the baskets. And then other important documents were the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s, when the country everywhere, not just here, was struggling financially. And so Oklahoma did a great job. I'm really proud of the state of Oklahoma for what it did with its Works Progress Administration funds. They helped lots of people, and they really focused a lot on American Indians as well. And then we have beautiful parks and places, the buildings that were built then. So these interviews that they undertook, they wanted to, this was a special project to help support writers who were not finding jobs, and researchers who were not finding jobs, and send them out, pay them to gather information from people about their memories. So it's occurring in the 1930s, and people, they really focused a lot on older people, and older people could remember pretty far back. So like this story about George Duck remembering that his grandmother had need of a horse, and she needed to borrow money from, it was actually a wealthy Cherokee man that she borrowed the money from, and his arrangement was she'd make him baskets, he'd credit 10 cents, and the horse was something like $100 or something, pretty good horse, I guess. And so we see the importance of baskets that may not show up on wouldn't have shown up on a record without this interview having occurred. And there are lots of those kinds of stories of people talking about baskets, and you have to sift through a lot of it, and that's where I would get sidetracked because of the wonderful stories that would be told that would take me off on tangents. Also, I would get online and just cue in words, phrases, trying to bring up information, and so I would find sometimes very obscure things that families might be talking about things. And then old newspapers, I did look at some old newspapers, but there's a lot more that need to be looked at. And then there were mission records, museum collections, government reports, and I bought about 12 books. Every time I write a history book, I wind up buying so many books I don't make any money at this at all. And also I might mention, for those of you who are aspiring writers, that I started a group called Tahlequah Writers. The thing about writing these books is that you bear all the upfront expenses. So all of your travel, all of the copying and everything, anything you buy, the books that you buy, of course you can as a writer use those for tax purposes, but you're expending a lot of money, and the photos, a lot of archives charge for photos, and they charge pretty highly. I was so lucky to mostly find sources that just freely shared their photos, and the government agencies usually do that, except for Oklahoma. But federal government sources, I think, got criticized early on when they weren't equalizing things and letting everybody have access. So they shared their photos, and they're very easy to get. That's the clipping from 1940. And this is Matt Anderson's great-grandmother. So if you know Matt at Spider Gallery, that's his great-grandmother, and he was so thrilled to see that. And he was one of the people I had read through the book. Whenever you write a book, it's very helpful to have somebody read over your manuscript and comment, and somebody who knows something about it. But I couldn't have all of you read it. So he was one of the sources. And so you can see the beautiful baskets she made, born in 1870. And this is her sister, born in 1883, so there's a few years between them, but both of them very active. And Nannie Hogner, we have a photo later of her teaching as well. And again, that's part of the WPA projects, is hiring American Indians to teach and to educate, and as well as to be taught and educated through those programs. I did visit the museum up in Jay. It's the Delaware County Historical Society, and they have a nice collection of baskets. Fanny Jumper, they have 3 or 4 made by her. But this one, we don't know the maker, but the Snell family in Jay had used this for making kunuchi, and it's a beautiful basket. Doesn't look like it's been used a lot though, so I don't know, I couldn't track down who to talk to. I probably just ran out of time at that point because I'm sure that it could have been done. So then the other tragedy that happened with Cherokees is the whole allotment thing. And I know growing up, I didn't realize what a devastating effect it had on the economy here, keeping us in poverty, and those who had succeeded and did well, some of them got impoverished by breaking up of their land the way it was done. So it was just a horrible, horrible story. And then some people were assigned guardians, and then you would get indebted through taxes, and so they were just kept poor. And then with statehood, government closed down and all of that, but then the lakes and everything kept us going. But again, we still had infrastructure delays, and so Mary Hogue, like I said, she was sturdy, and she, when she bought a car after the buggy and wagon days, she bought a very sturdy car because she knew what she wanted to do, to go into those back roads. Of course, cars were very sturdy back then anyway, generally, but she was really working hard on that. She began collecting in 1913, and she probably had an interest before that, but that was what she reported as collecting. And so again, we see an interesting basket that you might not have thought otherwise was a Cherokee creation. And then here's another cane basket attributed to 1921, collected by the Oklahoma Historical Society. Again, it does look like a basket that perhaps wasn't used. So it may be that it was cane being used to make baskets for sale, to have a showcase in your home, and not so much use them. This was one of those interesting stories I came across by putting in those keywords and such. And Ken Masters lives in Texas, and he has a page where he talks about family. He's Cherokee. And I'm sorry for those of you I might be blocking as I move back and forth. His let's see, great-grandmother was a midwife. And in 1930, she was paid by Polly Blackfox to help her deliver her babies. And so I say circa 1930 because I don't know which child of the woman. I did do a lot of genealogy. I have Ancestry.com and a lot of places I can access for genealogy. So I tracked down Polly Blackfox, but I wasn't sure which child, so that's why I don't have a definite date, but we have a definite sort of idea as to when this basket was made. And you see it's a sewing basket with a little basket interwoven into the bottom where you would put the needles and little things that you needed to have stored. So he had a lovely picture online, and I asked for it. And he shared the photo. So again, in the 1930s, we had Alice Marriott, who was working on the Indian Arts and Crafts Board, which is a board that still exists, by the way, and does try to protect American Indian arts and crafts by saying that you must be an American Indian to say you are selling American Indian arts and crafts, and so they regulate it. But in these early days, it was not focused on that. It was just trying to say, okay, there's baskets being made by Cherokees, and we've got to get them out in the world, got to market them. And so Alice Marriott was an anthropologist, moved to Oklahoma for the job, so she had to learn a lot. And some of her notes were interesting because she was saying that she was going to Muskogee, and she didn't think the baskets were very good there. And then she saw some baskets that Mary Hogue had, and she said, well, these are fine baskets. And Mary Hogue said, well, who have you been visiting? And she says who she's been visiting. She says, those are the culls. Those are the baskets I won't buy and handle, and that others like me don't deal with. So Alice Merritt had a lot to learn, obviously. But she cared. I mean, that was the nice thing about these people, is that they generally did try very hard to do a good job. And then, of course, the Sequoyah Weavers began, and that was an important aid. Now, that was mainly, they were focused on the loom weaving, but they were going to vend and sell their products, and so their gift shop would carry all kinds of crafts, and so it was a great venue for baskets. And there's the building out east of Tahlequah. As you drive out there, and there's still a sign in the window, and this is maybe the basket was sold right there. So that's a part of our history too. And there's Nannie Hogner teaching, and this would have been taken in the late 1930s, maybe early 40s. What I like about it is she's dressed up to teach baskets, which is not your typical thing, because usually you're soaking stuff, and if you're working with dyes or whatever. But she was probably told, we're going to be taking some photos, and these photos wound up in the reports that the WPA would be making to the federal government, and those reports are now in Fort Worth archives, the Fort Worth division of the National Archives, and they freely shared all of their photos. And I wouldn't have known about those photos except that a fellow from the Going Snake group did research there, and he posted. So without the help of everybody helping me find these wonderful places to get resources from, I'd have a pretty dull book and a drab story to tell you, but they really helped. Now here's another cane basket made in 1941, and it's in Philbrook, and the maker was Nancy Wildcat. And the interesting thing was that the notes at Philbrook said she was married to Ward Coachman, and Ward Coachman is Creek, but the original Ward Coachman also had a son who also was Creek, but he did live here in the Cherokee Nation. But I couldn't quite sort out that family's history, so I don't know. And there was a Nancy Teehee Wildcat, and so I did confer with Teehees to try to find out, is this relative of yours? I wanted to find out more about her, but I ran into dead ends, and if you look at that handle, it's kind of odd the way it's attached there. It doesn't. To me, it doesn't look like it'd be substantial if you put something heavy in the basket. So I wanted to find out more about whether it might be Creek-like, that maybe she was influenced by Creek baskets, but I'll never know unless somebody else does some research. So I mentioned fairs early on, the Muskogee Fair in 1944. We see the Sawney sisters, and again, these show up in the WPA reports as that work continued on. And it's so wonderful. Sisters took the first and second. I hope they didn't squabble about why did one get first, but they're beautiful baskets. And then you see this basket looks like the basket I showed you that I found in an antique shop. Not just like it, but very similar. And actually, if you visit the Carolyn Grant Foreman home in Muskogee, you will see 8 or maybe 10 of these baskets. They're just scattered around. This one was sitting on the floor by the fireplace, which, because I worked in museums, alarms me a bit. But then house museums are always in a special category. There's sort of crossovers. They're museums, but they're trying to look homey and set the site up. And so you don't want to put those baskets all away, but might not want to have them next to the fireplace, even though you're not using the fireplace, probably. So Carolyn Grant Foreman, not Cherokee at all, but she did have a basket collection, it seems. She had baskets from other places as well. And the reason probably she took an interest in the baskets, although I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg or the basket or the book, she wrote she was asked by Chief Milam to write a book on Cherokee weaving. It was, but it had a chapter on baskets. So there was this little chapter. It's not a very big book, probably 50 pages, and it's very old now, having been written in 1840 or 1948. If you want to see a copy, though, they do have one at NSU in their special collections. So I did get to go in and look at it. You know, you put your gloves on and you very carefully look through the book. It's not a great in-depth book. I didn't learn a lot about it, but I was really happy to know that Cherokee basket makers had some recognition at that time period. I don't know, you can't buy a copy of the book, or I looked around and didn't find any. It'd probably be pretty expensive. And it's probably not worth reprinting, actually, at this point. So I discovered that, you know, Miss Cherokee carries a basket, but I wanted to discover, well, when did that start? And was it from the very first time? And the very earliest photo does show the baskets being there. And then I don't know if there was a gap where they weren't used, but what I did learn was that until recently, they were always bought from North Carolina. So these basket purses were not something we were known to make here at certain points in time, but now basket makers. So that's another good evolutionary thing, is that, okay, there's a definite market now for those baskets. The people who make them know where those baskets came. Map I found in a little book, one of those 60s, 70s booklets, which has a lot of dancing Indians in it. And then it just happened to have in the centerfold this little map. And so this supposedly is showing you the tribes in Oklahoma. So the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Osage, and Kenwood, as if that is a tribe. But then this map may have been derived from an earlier time, or from earlier knowledge than the time it appeared in print, so that, you know, before we got our recognition back and got our government up, we really weren't seen necessarily as a political tribe. We didn't have a seat of government and such. And so Kenwood was a happening place and still is when it comes to baskets. I did want to go see Kenwood, so I found somebody who would take me up and show me around. And so what I found out in talking to people there was that they have connections outside of the area. Las Vegas, Dallas, there are buyers who regularly visit certain people who've made these connections. And so they work on baskets through the year, and then they sell a bunch of them. And that's great. And, but it seems a quietly known thing. So I thought that was very interesting. And this little map is probably what really made me say, I got to go see Kenwood and see what's up there. I did talk with basket makers, and Nannie Sixkiller is one that I talked with. And so I couldn't get around to talking to everybody, but I talked to a variety of people. And then when I was looking for a photo from the Cherokee Heritage Center, happened to be able to use a photo of her. And so, of course, the Heritage Center was very important in continuing baskets, too, to keep that knowledge going and to keep a market for it. And then we know Shauna Kane is one of the perhaps premier cane basket maker, or at least one of them, because now people are making cane baskets more than ever, I think, at this point in time, and they're so beautiful. So this is a poster. It kind of serves to show Shauna's basket, but also to talk about the museums and the shows that they have. And the art shows are very important to keeping basketry alive. So all of these things that happen work towards our goal of keeping culture and crafts alive and keeping the economy bubbling in this area. Ella Mae Black Bear was the first one, and it could have probably been anybody. Ella certainly has made great baskets, but she was lucky that a great basket of hers was in the right place at the right time when a curator from the Denver area was wanting to do this show called Lost and Found Traditions. And so he was looking for older examples and then contemporary examples. And so he came into the area, and there was one of her baskets, and he loved it, and he bought it, and he gave a great written statement about how wonderful that basket was and how important it was. That basket's not here. I couldn't get the exhibit is, of course, disbanded. I don't know where it quite wound up, but I was asking around for a photo of it, and I just couldn't get one. Don't know what happened to it. But these are Ella Mae Black Bear baskets. The one that caught the eye of the curator, though, did have dyed material in it, so it was very colorful, very masterfully done. But Ella Mae was known for making the cradles and making large baskets, and her baskets are in collections all around this area. And so the photo you see there of Ella Mae was one that took me a long time to find. She was another one of those people that must have been shy of cameras. and the Gilcrease formed an association with her, having her do a lot of programs and such, but they couldn't seem to find me a photo of her. And the ones that they did find, the one that this is taken from, were photos of not high enough resolution for my publisher, who is very picky to use it in the book. So you will not see Ella Mae in the book, which is heartbreaking to me, because I would rather have a bad photo of something that's rare than none at all. But this company, of course, competes with other companies, and it wants anyone who reviews the book not to ever say that there's a bad photo in there. So they had high standards when it came to the resolution of baskets. The rest of it I don't think they cared so much about, but it had to have high resolution. And also, I did not in the end wind up with enough high resolution color photographs, which they typically do in their books. And at that point, we were down to the wire of deadline when they rejected several of my photos as not being high enough resolution. Luckily, I had a cousin who was a photographer, and had him over, and I said, I have bunches of great photos that they're rejecting. And he said, well, let me look through them. And so he managed to up a bunch of them. You know, to me, it's like magic. I don't even know what I'm talking about on this process. but he managed to save a bunch of the photos, or I might have had a very sparsely illustrated book. But and he did the best he could with Ella's photo, but it didn't match their standards. Bessie Russell and Lena Blackbird are sisters who make baskets and show in the shows, and I did talk with Bessie early on. Drove out to her home, got horribly lost, and I'm too much of a city girl, I guess, to wander out in the country. Mike Dart is making beautiful baskets. This is a hickory ash basket that I think he sold this year, if I follow people. I've made Vivian Cottrell. She's working in cane a lot early on. Buckbrush. Mother was making baskets. They would sell home in the den. Stores who would get asked, I can get a Cherokee basket, and they'd say, well, this woman, here's her phone number. Well, they probably called her up instead of handing the phone number out, but they would make the connection. And so I just lose people who are tenacious in their lives, and so that's what they did. And Spider Gallery, of course, is another big benefit to the basket makers. You can go in there and you'll see that the prices are as they should be on those baskets because of the work and effort that go into them and the knowledge and talent that basket makers have and use. And so this is a very good thing for the area, Spider Gallery. And then, as you see, there's a basket made by Kathy Van Buskirk illustrating the spider, and the legend is that spider brought fire to our people by going in to get the fire from where it was being protected by scary characters. And the story does vary. Some say that spider wove a basket, and others say it was a clay pot. But we know spiders weave, so we'll go with the spider weaving the basket and bringing back that coal of fire that gave us warmth and life. And so basketry is very important in our legends and to our culture and our life. So I think that's the last one. Yep, that's it. Any questions at this point? I probably told you way more.
When did you start using non-traditional materials, all the
Okay, the commercial materials, yeah, and I mentioned that in the book about the idea of the commercial materials coming in. It's interesting with the female seminary, basket making was taught to the students there. It was always commercial material, and in fact it was material like yucca and material that we don't even use around here. But they were learning their crafts from very different perspective than basket makers. So it was just an interesting side track of and exists, but they don't really represent the St. Louis World's Fair. The thing about basket making is that you have to go gather, or somebody has to go gather the material for you and then process it. And that is very hard work. It's very time consuming. It means that you would need to charge quite a bit more for your baskets than if you're using commercial material, even though you're paying for the wise. You can sell those baskets cheaper because your labor's not so counted into it. And the customers, the thing to offset that, if you wouldn't want that to be happening here, is educating the wider population across the United States and the world that there are baskets made of natural materials and gathered and they deserve a higher price, or there are baskets being made of commercial that might deserve a lower price, although you still factor in expertise and the beauty of the basket and what the market wants. So you've got all these things playing at odds. But the reason then the commercial materials would be used is that for women who have worked their lives and canner and cook and launder and all of it at home, don't always, as they're old or the health to go out. I did back home to Oklahoma that the Iroquois men realized that their women, they work with ash, and with ash you pound the logs and strip off the strips, and you've brought in heavy logs to work with to begin with. So the men said, if we want this craft to continue, we have to step up and do that for the basket makers. And so they had a whole kind of association and organization of men who were on call if you needed somebody to go do this for you. And maybe that could work here, where there would be some people who would say, yes, for a basket maker, I will go get that material and help process it and help with it. So we're kind of all in this together, and if we want Cherokee heritage to continue, sometimes we have to adapt and make changes, because earlier baskets were made by younger women, or it'd be processed and maybe the older women would make it, but the younger people were doing a lot of the hard work. So that's why you'll see a lot of commercial material, and if people were educated about it, they would understand pricing of it maybe a little better. Any other questions?
Tell how to gather a
No, I didn't write a how-to book because I don't know how to. And when I first started it, I thought I wanted to know everything, but then I realized history is sort of what I'm most expert in, and that for me to become adept at gathering, processing, and then writing about that, and it's very hard to write a how-to, to write in words how something is done. That's very intricate. So, and it would take a lot of photos, and it's a good thing I didn't start out trying to do a how-to with the photos because my photos were not good enough, I guess. So I just describe in a very vague way the gathering and using quotes from people as they talked about it. So there is a chapter on the materials and the processing, but it would just be your introduction to how to do that, and if you were going to do it, you would still want to talk to Anderson as somebody who's done that for folks, and so you could ask him. Other questions? I've probably gone over time, those of you that need to get back to work.
Did you find some of our basket makers here had to go to the east to get the knowledge that we lost?
Well, there is that story of Thelma and others who went back. They wanted to get patterns and information and all of that. And so we had basket makers in times when basket making was not being done as much or as openly as it is today. And so our early chiefs realized that as we were coming back as a nation, that our heritage and our crafts and our arts needed to be to the forefront, needed to be revived, you could say, though they never died away. I do want to make that point. They were always being, just wasn't obvious. And so people living in, say, one area of Cherokee Nation may have lost it, seemingly, and then needed to revive it. So it's always good whenever something has been going on for a while and you have historic roots. It's always good to go back to those roots and just make sure those threads are connected, that you're sharing information back and forth. So yes, there have been and continues to be. Our Oklahoma Cherokee folks go back home a lot, and they're always asking questions about how do we do this and how do we do that. And so that exchange does go on, but yeah, it did happen in the 50s and 60s, and probably just continuously. Other questions? So much, and if you want to come look at these two baskets I brought, and then I'm going to sign books if you've bought books, and turn it over to Catherine to shut things down. Thank you.
Great presentation, and as
Thanks.
she mentioned, she will be over in the gift shop